All right, we want to move to Texas now, where Democrats blocked the Republican push to overhaul voting in the state, at least for now. Texas Democrats successfully stopped the passage of the Senate Bill 7, a voting package that would have made Texas one of the most strict states in the country when it comes to casting a ballot. Nearly every Democrat walked out of the House chamber overnight, making it impossible for the GOP to vote on the bill before the midnight deadline. Senate Bill 7 would ban mobile voting booths and drive-through voting. It would also include new mail-in voting restrictions and empowers partisan poll watchers. The bill bars early voting on Sunday mornings, potentially ending Souls to the Polls, the program, which is run by predominantly black churches to get worshipers to vote after services. The Washington Post reports the bill also includes language making it easier to overturn an election, no longer requiring evidence that fraud actually altered an outcome of a race, but rather only that enough ballots were illegally cast that could have made a difference. Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted shortly before midnight that the election bill would be added to a special session of Congress where it is expected to pass. Let's bring in former Democratic Senator Beto O'Rourke of Texas. He represented the El Paso district, also ran for president. It's good to have you on the show this morning. What more can Democrats do to block this? It ultimately is going to go through. And is this bill based on the big lie?
Democrats in Texas did a lot. They bought us some time, and they stopped one of the worst voter suppression bills in the country. But when you link what they were trying to pass in Texas with what passed in Georgia, Florida, Iowa, Montana, what's pending in more than 40 other state legislatures, you see that we have the biggest attack on American democracy in our lifetimes. And it requires a federal response and intervention, which we have pending in the United States Senate before the PEOPLE Act. And that's how you push back and defeat the big lie, Mika. That's how you ensure that we have multiracial democracy in America going forward. That's how you protect the right to vote on this Memorial Day, when we remember the Americans who gave their lives to preserve and protect that right to vote. Let's honor their sacrifice and their commitment by making sure that bills like these do not pass and that we have protection against them by having the United States Senate and President Joe Biden do everything they can to pass this voting rights bill and protect that right forevermore.
So, Congressman, you said this is one of the biggest risks to democracy in our lifetime. What provisions specifically do you consider to be pose one of the greatest risks to democracy in our lifetime?
I think the most chilling aspect of Senate Bill 7 in Texas was this provision that was literally just introduced in the last 48 hours that would allow an election to be overturned based on the allegation of fraud, even if the alleged fraudulent votes would not have meaningfully changed the outcome of that election. When you connect that to the big lie that there was widespread voter fraud in 2020, somehow Joe Biden is illegitimate president, you can see state legislators like the one here in Texas not accepting the results of future presidential elections. Imagine what would happen with our 40 electoral college votes in 2024 if the allegation of fraud was made and the rightful winner was not recognized. That's not an unbelievable scenario after January 6th and the almost violent overturn election, or what Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz and others voted to do on that very same day. That's what concerns me the most, Joe.
Yeah, that is a concerning provision there. A lot of times we'll be talking about this, and there'll be a discussion about the grave dangers, and people will talk about no more drive-up voting or all of these things that actually just came about in 2020. And I always say be very careful to, separate out the special exceptions that were made for pandemic voting and go back and look at 2018. And so yeah, drive-up voting and 24-hour voting, those are things that were only put in place because of the pandemic. Those aren't grave threats to democracy if you take those away. Obviously, I would want them there only because we want as many people to vote as possible. But I think you've really zoned in on the most most concerning part of this legislation, just like the Georgia legislation. And it's people are always distracted by these provisions, the drive-up voting, the ballot boxes, the mobile ballot boxes, when in reality, it's giving legislators, Republican legislators or Democratic legislators, whoever's trying to change the outcome of the election, the power to overturn an election, even if there's not evidence of widespread voting fraud that changed the outcome of the election. And like Georgia, who made some of these changes, here you have Texas trying to do the same thing.
That's absolutely right. And it's worth remembering that our democracy is the exception and not the rule in world history, and the exception on the planet today. And as hard fought as this democracy was won, we could so easily lose it with provisions like this one. But I also want to call attention to some of these seemingly innocuous provisions, like closing polling places in Texas or, quote unquote, standardizing elections. You know, the poll tax 100 years ago was somewhat innocuous sounding. The literacy test, the counting the number of jelly beans in a jar. But in every instance, they were used to try to stop Black Texans and African Americans throughout the former Confederacy from being able to use their rights to vote. And in that same way, ending souls to the polls and closing polling places in predominantly African American neighborhoods is doing the exact same thing in 2021. And I do think if you connect it to all these other provisions in other states, you see the greatest attack on multiracial democracy since Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law in 1965. So it requires a commensurate response, which, as great as what Texas Democrats did last night, can only be found in the United States Senate. We need the 1965 Voting Rights Act of our day, which is the For the People Act.
Yeah, it sure would be nice if Democrats in the Senate would focus on H.R. 4 and pass John Lewis's bill and then get to H.R. 1 and they can debate that. There's a lot to debate there. But it's very interesting, Mika, that Beto brings up, again, this provision. It is so transparently focused on stopping Black people from voting, making it harder for Black Americans to vote. Actually, this Souls to the Polls program that the congressman's talking about has been highly effective across America, where people going to church and Black churches, after church, they go vote as a community of faith, which is, of course, I think that's what we conservatives have always said. We want communities of faith to get out and be more engaged, voting the polls. That's what the moral majority and Jerry Falwell always said they were for. Well, what they're doing in Texas is what they proposed in Georgia and then dropped, but it's so transparently aimed at Black Americans, where they're pushing the opening time to 1 p.m., saying, well, you know what, they'll get out of church, they'll leave church, and there's no way they'll be able to bring Black Americans organize in the way white Americans organize through churches. Won't be able to get them back to the polling booths on Sunday at 1 o'clock. It's just transparent. It's embarrassing, and it's so targeted towards Black Americans who are people of faith that Republicans should be humiliated.
Well,
in
it's
Texas.
just another thing that, not just in Texas, where the Republican Party, adding to their brilliant brand of insurrectionism and whatever else, is that they want to be the party that keeps Black people from voting. That's the message they're sending.